this one. Selection. Hello, everybody. Some of you will know me well. Sorry, some of you won't. I have to wear a microphone so I do not strain my voice. The reason being that some of you know I had a really nasty cycle accident about 18 months ago now and spent 2 months in hospital and could not speak and could not swallow, and at the time the doctor did not know whether my voice would recover or not. Well, I'm delighted to say it is on the road to recovery, but I just have to preserve it because the recovery is probably going to take about 5 years. I'm only a third of the way there now. So that's why my voice is rather slow and soft, and sometimes I trip over words. I've never given this talk before, so this is actually a pretty serious talk. And I've never given this talk because I don't think I would ever have had the confidence to give this talk. I've thought quite hard about whether what I'm going to say I've always thought over the last, say, 50 years, or whether these are feelings that I developed quite recently. I think it's probably fair to say that if I can remember back well to how I was in my 20s, what I think now is what I did think then. But 45 years later, I have the confidence to say it to you. I'm also very conscious that a lot of you may agree with me, what I say. A lot of you may not agree with me. Some of you, this may be very personal, and this may strike a chord of not a very nice note in your own family, to which I say, I'm sorry. But all you can do is just say what you think. In the jargon, we call it freedom of speech in the university. And so long as I'm vaguely polite, I ought to be able to say exactly what I think. So there we go. So, conscientious objection in the 21st century. There is another way of interpreting that phrase, which could be objection on the grounds of conscience to X, Y, and Z. And which of those do I mean? Well, I could definitely give a second talk on that second sentence, but I'm just going to talk about the first sentence. Conscientious objection applies to warfare. This is a charity event, and let me just say a little bit about this cardiac risk in the young. It's almost inevitable that as you get older, you know people affected by the charity for which you are raising money. And when I heard that ChemSoc was raising money for this charity, I did think of two people. One I didn't know very well at all. He was a son of my PhD supervisor, and I first met him when he was about 6 or 7, and I was, I suppose, 21 or thereabouts. And he went to Bangor University, and a week before his finals, his heart just stopped. It wasn't a freak, but his heart just stopped. He clearly got a congenital heart difficulty, which was completely unknown about, and he died almost instantly. That was very sad, of course. And then I know 40 years later, he's now 23 years, who went to university, not at this university, and he was diagnosed with a murmur in his heart, which is quite serious. But he got through university, and I have to say the pastoral support in that university for him was excellent. And I hope the same thing would happen if that happened in this department in Birmingham. So, I'm sure you've all seen these two posters. Your country needs you. Your king and country needs you. The famous adverts of the middle of the First World War, when the country was going down the tubes, and the government of the day and the king of the day said, come on guys, let's go for it. They need you. They didn't actually say what they needed you for. And in my opinion, what they were really trying to get people, because this was 100 years ago, they wanted to prolong the empire, in my opinion. And I think they really thought that everybody would have fun. There was no mention of what actually happened, which was thousands, if not millions, were killed in the trenches. And long term, they, of course, at the time, could not think of the consequences of what might happen over the next 100 plus years, which gets us to 2018. So I'm talking about COs to war. What does this mean? And I can absolutely assure you that if you go to a Quaker meeting, which I do most Sundays, and Mark has mentioned that I am a Quaker, and if there were, say, 30 people there, ranging from age, let's say 5 up to 95, as is often the case, I think you would get 30 different answers. For some people, conscientious objection is to all forms of violence. Taken at its limit, if somebody comes up and hits you, you lie down and basically say, do it again. That's what I call the Mahatma Gandhi approach. This is Gandhi in the 1940s, just before his death in 1948 in India. I think most people, however, would say conscientious objection is to war. What does war mean? Does it mean regaining land that another country has poached, or does it mean killing people? And then there is such a question, is there such a thing as a just war? Are there certain circumstances in which war, however distasteful and horrible, is unfortunately something that has to be gone through because worse things might happen? And speaking purely personally, it's just me speaking, I think there is a thing as a just war. I think there is only one major conflict in the last 100 years that satisfies my criteria of what counts as a just war, and that was the Second World War from 39 to 45. All other wars should never, never, never have been fought, including the awful First World War. That's just my opinion. Inevitably, that brings us to what do different religions say about war, and the answer is a multitude of things, or they don't say anything, or they avoid the issue. So, and of course, religions can include Christian religion, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, the lot. I don't know about some of those. I know vaguely what most of the Christian religions say. But again, even within one small religion like the Quakers, there is an enormous variety of views on this. The Quaker movement was absolutely split down the middle in 1914, when half said that war should never have been, and half thought that it did justify what they saw as a just war, and therefore they should fight. And to its great credit, the religion did hold together and came out of it almost stronger. Some people tried to resign their membership from the Quakers, but on principle, their application for stopping membership was refused. because it was a matter of conscience, and the Quakers never tell anybody what to believe or what to say. It's purely individual. I mean, some of you may know I am on the University Chaplaincy Committee as a part-time Quaker chaplain, which is basically a form of long-term social welfare across a whole multitude of people, and religion is multi-faith, which is the only way that they would take you on to do this. So although you might be representing one particular religion, what that religion think about something is irrelevant. Now, this is just me. I've said that I think we should never, never, never have gotten to that First World War. And by my criterion, the benefits were never going to outweigh the disadvantages. So if we divide this up into good points and bad points, it's very simplistic, this. What are the bad things that happened over the last 100 years as a result of the war, which the UK happened to win, if win means what we think it means? Well, as a lot of you will know, there was an international treaty in 1919 called the Versailles Treaty. Europe was divided up. It was incredibly harsh on the Germans, and out of this, the Third Reich developed 15 years later, and that produced Mr. Hitler, which led to mass persecutions of the Jews, concentration camps, etc., etc., and that led to World War II. And having said concentration camps, let me just say that concentration camps were not invented in World War II. They'd happened initially in the Boer War in 1902, and that was because of the Diro British wanted to in turn lock away all the wretched Dutch people that they had captured in faraway South African country. I believe the First World War or the Second World War led to the establishment of Israel 3 years later, and this is no statement at all about the Jewish religion at all, but it led to the Middle East issues, which I think we would all agree are endemic and have never been solved 70 years later. After the Second World War, I would say in this country we had a very austere country, let's say lasting from roughly the mid-1930s through to the mid-1950s, which encompasses the latter period of that is when I was born. And in recent years, this is recent years, and I've read quite a bit about this, I believe in this country they're led to what we now call PTSD. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. It was national and it was chronic, and it lasted, I reckon, from the end of the Second World War, probably for about 20 years. I really do believe that. I do believe growing up as children in the late 40s and 50s, so my new generation, was a totally different experience from roughly 30 years later when we had kids of our own. And then half a generation, you guys came along. So you must have been born on average around 2000-ish. I do think, however, there was a good thing established, and this is what I'm going to come on to talk. 2 years into the war, the absolute principle of conscientious objection was established in law. That is, if there was a call up to arms, people could apply and register as a CO on the matter of principle. not on the matter of religion, it was just on the matter of who you were and what you thought. And of course, myself, I now think that was a really good thing. Although the law was passed in 1916, it was bloody hard work to be a CO in the last 2 years of the First World War. I do know a daughter of one of the original CO's people. The daughter is now early 90s. Her father died, I don't know when, 30, 40 years ago. But you know, he was stoned, he was pillared he was hounded because he just stood up for his principles. 20 or 30 years, 25 years later, however, conscientious objection, I think, was accepted by the Second World War. And from that developed organisations called the Friends Ambulance Brigade, which was a way of pacifists could contribute, if that's the right word, to world war, but not by having to raise weapons or hit or do anything unpleasant to any other person. And if I had lived in that period, I'm sure I would have been I am a CO now. I would have been a CO then, and probably I would have volunteered for the Friends Ambulance Brigade. And then two more general things. I think these two world wars, probably a really good thing, did bring about the demise of the empire. It was going to happen in any case, but it would probably accelerated it by about 50 years. And I personally think it also accelerated by about 50 years the prominence and importance of females, certainly in this country and in fact in all developed Western countries. Of course, after the Second World War, the United Nations was set up about 1948. And my feeling is that for all the criticism there is of it, on balance, it's probably done a good thing. The Commonwealth replaced the Empire. I'm not so sure about. We set up the EEC within Europe in 1957, I think. Britain wasn't anything to do with it. That became the EU in 1986. And that, of course, led to the infamous referendum of 2 years later. 2 years ago, sorry. And I have often wondered in the last few years, what would history of the last 100 years have been like if we had not entered the war? Of course, there is no answer. We do not know. Okay, the Kaiser would have run mock through Europe, but I can't believe it would have just been Germany and all of Europe became one country. I just cannot believe it. But what would have happened, I just do not know. If I'm slightly naughty, Mark, I sometimes wonder what people in 100 years will say what would have happened if we had not voted to leave the EU in 2016. In 2116, what will people say then? Of course, we don't know the answer to that because we have no idea what's going to happen over the next 100 years. We have no idea what's going to happen over the next 100 days, do we? We might need a new Prime Minister in 100 days' time. Might be a good thing. That was a joke. Am I allowed to say that?
Academic freedom of speech.
Good stuff. You're on record. So we are now in 2018. And what would being a CO mean in reality now? And the answer is 2 words: absolutely nothing. Because now wars are not fought with people and trenches and all that bravado that there was in 1914 to 18. and aeroplanes in 39 to 45 and ships on the ocean. It's fought with money and bombs and drones and dare one say nuclear weapons. And everybody will have all these statistics, and I hate statistics because there's only one. Whenever you're talking about any something, always keep the statistics to just one, which is for you the most important. And this is the stat that I'm sure is accurate, that I can never forget. That 100 years ago, 90% of all casualties were fighting people. Okay, they were volunteers, but that's what they volunteered to do. The government said you were going to have fun and prolong the empire. They didn't say that you're off to the trenches and you might not last half a day. Whereas 90 years, 100 years later, in the Iraq War, 90% of all fatalities were civilians. That's a shocking statistic. Of course, we did have national service, and that was abolished in the late 1950s. And we've had no corps since the middle of the Second World War, thank goodness. So what does being a CO mean? Absolutely nothing. So why do people become a CO currently? And out of that sprung this pressure group, which is called Conscience. And their buzz phrase is taxes for peace, not for war. And it is small. It's only been going a few years. I don't know how many members it's got. I suspect it's about a few thousand. It's got one or two big names. One is Mark Rylance, that's him here. He's a very famous Shakespearean actor, and he was acting Cromwell, I think, in Wolf Hall on the telly a few years ago. This is Bruce Kent on the left here, who founded the campaign for nuclear disarmament. And this is them lying white poppies at the CO stone in Tavistock Square in London. A few MPs are members of Conscious. Caroline Lucas, the head of the Green Party, is probably the most famous. There are a few others. I won't say which parties they're from. It's not relevant. It has nothing to do with politics. And this is a lovely email that I got. If you apply to join Conscience, your name goes onto a list. And you have to write why you are a conscientious objector. In other words, which of those points is important to you, and what would you draw the line at, or why are you a CO? And that actually is quite a challenging thing to write, especially if you believe in the just war. And I looked up on my computer last night what I'd actually said, and I couldn't find it. I must have saved it somewhere, but I can remember what I said without finding the exact words. It was that I do believe that every now and in 100 years there is an argument for war. There are going to be people killed, but I could not do it myself. I would rather be killed than kill somebody else. That is just me, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I really believe, of course I've never been put to the test, but I'm absolutely sure that is true. So I wrote my essay, and I got this lovely email back just 2 and a bit years ago. Thank you, Richard, for registering as a CO. You have been added to our register of COs, which will be used to demonstrate the conflicts that each CO is faced when the government pays for its violent behaviour. Because, of course, everybody, whether we like it or not, who pays taxes. Now, students here do not pay taxes, but about 4 or 5 of us do pay taxes, whether we like it or not. Roughly, I think the figure is 8% of our taxes go for military purposes. We call it defence, but it's not really defence. It's contribution to Trident, it's contribution for armed forces, etc., etc. And as of a year ago, another MP tried to introduce a private member's bill in Parliament. Ruth Cadbury, she's part of the extended Cadbury family, who are Quakers, and who set up the Cadbury chocolate factory in Bourneville, which was now taken over by Kraft about 5 years ago. And this is her here, and these are the 5 people who work for Conscience. I think they are all volunteers, I think. Death is overrated. It's time for peace and success. And the purpose of this private member's bill was that if you are registered as CO, you had the absolute right to divert that part of the money that went for warfare to peaceful purposes, where peace it was interpreted in the broadest sense of the word. Okay? So as warfare changes, so must the nature of conscientious objectors. Now, it was actually very sad. This bill was going to be up in Parliament one day, about the 25th of March 2017, and on the 24th of March, the day before, there were some lunatics who drove lorries across Parliament Bridge, across the river, and killed a lot of people. And Parliament went into shutdown, and they cancelled all the business for the next week or so, and this bill got shelved. That was just genuine bad luck. I think it's probably very, very, very unlikely that that bill would have got through, because private members' bills only get through if they've got government support. But sometimes, and history shows this is true, you have to start small, slowly, and hope that over a period of time you might get there. And I think most people who are registered as COs think that within time we might get there, we might get to this. Now, I suspect it will be about 20 to 50 years. It slightly depends who the governments of the days are over the next 20 years. But I think it is possible, possibly likely, that this is going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years. And if you think back, that was about the time period that women took to get the vote that they did in 1918, I think. Okay, there was probably about 20 or 30 years prior to that of pressure as was appropriate for the time to get this to results. So, that's what I think the situation of CO is, conscientious objection in the 21st century, and how it might evolve over the next few years. Thank you all very much for listening. Now, hang on, I've got to stop this.